distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, good morning and welcome to the 2021 National Social Cohesion and Inclusion Conference hosted by the Australian Baha'i community. I join you today in Queensland, in Emerald in central Queensland, from the land of the Wangan, Gairi and Western Gangaloo people, and pay my respects to their elders, past, present and emerging. My name is Sabo Sinai, and I will be your MC for today. Before we begin formalities, I would like to just run through some logistical aspects of the conference. As you're aware, the first two sessions are run as a webinar, and there'll be opportunities for participants to ask questions during the sessions to our presenters and panelists. The third and final session will be a small breakout rooms so that every delegate joining the conference has the opportunity to contribute to this national conversation on social cohesion. The environment we are all striving to create in this conference is one of respect and courtesy. We ask that the utmost courtesy and respect is shown towards one another during the webinar and the Zoom breakout rooms as well. If there are any inappropriate or disrespectful comments made, please note that we will have to respectfully remove that person from the conference. You'll have received both a Zoom webinar and a Zoom meeting link in your conference reminder email, so please have it easily accessible. We'll also put the link in the breakout rooms in the chat after the second session and instruct when to click on it to join. To formally begin our program and collect us all to the sacredness of the lands we are joining from, I'd like to invite Yvonne Weldon from the Metropolitan Local Aboriginal Land Council to offer a welcome to country.
Thank you. Hello everyone. As was said, my name is Yvonne Weldon. I am a Wiradjuri woman from Cowra here in New South Wales. I'm from the waters of the Clare, which later became known as the Lachlan, and of the Murrumbidgee Rivers. I am a representative of the Metropolitan Local Aboriginal Land Council, who are the culture authority under the Aboriginal Land Rights Act for the land that I am on. I would like to pay my respects to all elders past and present, to all First Nations, to you and the many Aboriginal nations' ancestral lands you're on and representing virtually today. The boundaries of our traditional owners are embedded into the Earth's natural landscapes. The boundaries of the Eora are the Hawkes River in the north, the Nepean in the west, and the Georges River in the south. My people, the Aboriginal people, have been a part of this land for more than 60,000 years. We are the oldest living culture of the world. And wherever you travel on this beautiful country of ours, understand you're entering the lands of nations, tribes and clans that have existed before all written words and all history, and it continues here today. On behalf of the Metropolitan Local Aboriginal Land Council, the elders and the members, I welcome everyone to the land of the Gadigal. I acknowledge the Gadigal people and also of the people's lands that you're on, whose spirits and ancestors will always remain with these lands, our Mother Earth. Aboriginal people are inclusive from all from across these lands and across the globe. So whether you come here via foot, air or water, our people include everyone. We don't turn away, we honour all living things. This is who we are and will continue to be. We all are the fabric of this land, woven together with all of our cultural rich differences. And all of us must work together to build a cohesive, inclusive and harmonious society that enriches the lives of all of us. And we all play an important role in accepting and celebrating all of our diversity. And we need to do this so every single day, bringing us all together. We all need to reflect upon our footsteps we're leaving to know where we're heading, shaping a society, a country we can be proud of. All of us together can bring about positive changes to multiple generations, starting a healing to the past generations by declaring what should not have taken place. To the present day generations, giving them hope and creating a future for the next generations, for everyone in this country. We are in this together. and we can achieve positive change each and every day. No matter what walks of life we all come from, we all need to support each other. So let's think about the difference you can make today that will become the milestones of the future, all our futures. So let us all draw upon my people's spirits as we continue on our journey. May my people's spirits walk with you and guide you as we strive forward for us all. Again, on behalf of the Metropolitan Local Aboriginal Land Council, welcome to Gadigal land. This always was and always will be Aboriginal land. Thank you and have a wonderful day.
Thank you, Yvonne, for that beautiful welcome to country that really set the tone for today's proceedings. Thanks so much. The Honourable Natalie Ward, New South Wales Minister for Multiculturalism, sends her apologies that she couldn't be here today live, as it's a parliamentary sitting week, but has kindly sent through a video recording to open the conference, and we'll now play that for you.
I'm honoured to have been asked to open this important online gathering, the Australian Baha'i Community's National Social Cohesion and Inclusion Conference. As the New South Wales Minister for Multiculturalism, my role is to promote social cohesion and community harmony and enable our diverse communities to prosper. According to the 2016 census, here in New South Wales we come from 307 ancestries, 225 different birthplaces, practice 146 religions, and speak more than 215 languages. I'm proud it's widely acknowledged that New South Wales is a successful multicultural state. We recognise the benefits that cultural diversity brings to our way of life. The Baha'i community plays a valuable and much appreciated role in fostering this cross-cultural friendship. As we ease out of lockdowns and begin to enjoy old freedoms, now is a good time to reflect on how our community resilience has fared during the crisis. I believe our cohesion as a society has held together well. In the face of this very testing time, diverse communities came together to tackle this dreadful disease. Friends, neighbours, community groups, religious organisations, multicultural media outlets, translators and interpreters all work together with local, state and federal governments to fight this pandemic. Through these countless acts of unity, they all showed themselves to be champions of social cohesion and inclusion. No doubt, this conference will suggest the way forward for our state's and our nation's social cohesion and spirit of inclusion. But I'd like to suggest that we've already come a long way. Thank you, and I wish you all a very successful conference.
Thank you to Minister Ward for taking the time to offer your thoughts on social cohesion. I think I and many others here today would resonate with that observation that social cohesion has come a long way and has really shone in the past 18 months as we've all collectively faced this health crisis. So as most of you would know, this is the third annual National Social Cohesion and Inclusion Conference. Each year, this conference brings together policymakers, thought leaders, practitioners, and social actors from across the country to reflect on the progress made and the obstacles which still remain to social cohesion. At last year's conference, the Australian Baha'i community launched the publication, Creating an Inclusive Narrative, which is a distillation of experiences and insights for strengthening social cohesion, captured from 50 roundtable consultations with 500 community and institutional representatives held across the country. Last year's conference sessions unpacked the key principles and pathways for actions identified in that publication. After 1 year of ongoing conversations around the publication's content and the evolution of this discourse on social cohesion, this conference will bring together the core foundational concepts to social cohesion, including our common humanity and inherent oneness, inclusion, diversity, and unifying consultative spaces. This conference is an opportunity to pause and reflect, learn from each other, share your insights, and continue this collective exploration on social cohesion. Our nation finds itself in a very interesting period in history where the global pandemic has disrupted our way of life. Restrictions on personal interactions and suffering has been experienced across all states and territories. The extraordinary rise in capacity for solidarity, cooperation, generosity, and to sacrifice one's comfort for the well-being of others has found expression in service to humanity, even though lingering habits of contest, self-interest, prejudice, and closed-mindedness continue to hinder humanity's movement towards unity. The presenters and panelists we're going to hear from today will speak to the opportunities before us to create the kind of country where everyone feels they belong, can work in harmony, and transform the way we live as restrictions ease. The first session will explore deeply our inherent oneness, inclusion and diversity, and its implications on policy, strategies, new ways of knowing and doing to reach higher degrees of cohesion across the country. Pastor Ray Minniecon will offer the keynote address and will be joined later in the session by race relations researcher Penny Taylor and our conference moderator Ida Walker, Director of Public Discourse for the Australian Baha'i Community. Pastor Ray Minniecon is an elder Indigenous statesman and a descendant of the Kabi Kabi Nation and the Gurang Gurang Nation of Southeast Queensland. He is a distinguished local and international Indigenous leader through his successful advocacy for the self-determination of Australian Indigenous culture and law. He's also a director of Bunji Consultancies, which supports leadership, business initiatives, and community development projects. He's a current board member of NAIITS, an Indigenous Learning Community, which is an accredited international Indigenous university, offering postgraduate degree programs. In the Anglican Diocese of Sydney, Ray is the pastor of Sacred Tree Indigenous Ministries at St. John's Anglican Church in Glebe, New South Wales. Ray, we warmly welcome you to the conference and look forward to your address.
Hey, thanks, Saba. And also a really deep appreciation to the Baha'i community for hosting this incredibly important conference on national social cohesion and diversity, or inclusion and diversity. And thank you for the honor of addressing you today. I'm just honored. Where do I start? Okay. There is an old ancient poem, ancient Chinese poem. It says these words. It says, "Go to the people, live among them, learn from them, work with them, plan with them, start with what they know, build on what they have, teach by showing, learn by doing. Not a showcase, but a pattern. Not odds and ends, but a system. Not relief, but release. But of the best leaders, when their task is done, the people all say, we did it ourselves." I guess that's the big challenge for us here in terms of leadership when we approach this particular issue. Within Indigenous leaders, we have incredible high values and high ideals. Let me just spell out 4 of those. And Yvonne, in her acknowledgement of country, already has mentioned this. We believe in collaboration without subordination. So we're already on that particular pathway. We do appreciate difference without bias or inequality. This is a part of our values and ideals as Indigenous Australians. We do tolerate and respect the customs and cultures of others. And we do have a deep appreciation of the past and a very sincere, pragmatic hope for the future. One of our incredible characteristics as Indigenous peoples globally is that we like to walk backwards into the future in the footprints of our ancestors. So we need to know where we come from, what our ancestors has taught us, what they have passed on to us, so that we can pass on to not only our children, but our future generations, the benefits of their wisdom, their knowledge, and their understanding. And so as we approach or come into this particular time, as we come into lockout, the end of lockdown here in Sydney, we come to this particular time in our history to ask ourselves, what of the future for all of us as Australians? So to me, first and foremost, let us be truth tellers. We've got to speak to each other with faith, hope, and love. For Indigenous Australians, we don't want charity. We don't want handouts. We can't approach each other with a deficit mentality. We're not after welfare. We want to build our future with everyone on the assets that have made us the oldest surviving culture on the planet. And some of the assets that we bring to the table are deeply embedded in our culture and our spirituality. We're very resilient people. We're people with vision, with hopes for the future. We have a yearning aspirations for a better country, a better Australia. We do know how to think strategically. We know how to collaborate and cooperate. We bring to the table a new way of seeing and being that's based upon old ways, ancient ways that have been quite successful. Can you imagine that we've looked after this country for the past 60,000 years, for those millennia, and yet in the past 100 or 200 years, we've seen the destruction of our planet, our country, our land, our environment, our seas, our waters. And so we have to bring those things back into being again. And so we bring this back so that we can have a new way of conducting business. We bring in a new situational leadership style that allows for multi-leadership growth and diversity. And so we bring to the table a new language based upon an old language. And so we have much to learn from each other, from all those who have come into our country. And so in order to go forward, we're going to need to build strong and willing partnerships, the best that we can achieve together, because we're on a wild and rugged walk down some very slippery slopes. We'll need the best guides. We'll need the best advice. We'll need to take the best path, even if for some of us, it takes us through some very rugged valleys and through some uncharted waters and lead us down some garden paths that have not been trod yet. But if we start on this premise that we will speak to each other in truth, and we'll be sure that we can map out a pathway that will lead us through those slippery slopes and those rugged terrains to opportunities that we have never even considered or imagined. But the opportunities that arise on this journey will come at a cost. But if we pay that cost, we can be guaranteed that we can build a pathway, not just for ourselves, but for the ones who will seek to follow the path that we have made for each other. So for me, one of the most important challenges for all humanity is this notion of what is reconciliation. That means reconciling with ourselves, first and foremost, reconciling with each other, reconciling with our Mother Earth and all that creation provides us, and also reconciling ourselves with our Creator. Within our system, we have all the tools necessary to bring about those changes. Sadly, we've only been seen through a deficit model, but if you look at our assets, we bring them to the table when we've always brought them to the table. If you look at the statement from the heart, for example, all we're asking for is 3 simple things. Treaty. And that treaty could also be translated into our treaty with country, with our land, so that we're not treating it badly anymore, but we have a covenant with it that we're going to look after it. We also want truth. We brought into our country. We can't go forward on lies and mistruths. And thirdly, we need our voice to be heard. Truth, treaty, voice. That's the statement from the heart. Hopefully that'll bring about the justice that we all seek. One of the things about when I read the book about, what's his name, Plato's book on the Republic, there was a character in those dialogues that fascinated me. His name was Thrasymachus. And he said something about justice that's sort of resonated with me, and I struggle with it. But he said, look, Thrasymachus says to Plato in that dialogue in book 1, he says, look, justice is only in the interest of the powerful. Very powerful statement. What are you saying? There's how and who defines justice? It's the powerful. Then the question is, then what is justice? And I guess we need to take this conversation as a part of the way forward in the ways in which we look at diversity, unity, and the things that we desire for not only for ourselves, for our families and for our communities, but for our nation. For us, we're the only nation on the planet that has come up with what we would call a reconciliation action plan. Now, it's designed for organizations and communities, but if you look at that particular framework, that template that our people have come up with through the Reconciliation Council, then you can see how we're trying our hardest to put on the table the opportunity for us to reconcile our differences. And it comes through 4 very important concepts, or 4, the acronym is RISE. It means let's reflect, R for reflect. How we can step out what we need to do to prepare ourselves for reconciliation initiatives in our community. Let's be innovative. That's the second RI, innovate. How do we implement the plans that we want, not just for our organizations or for our families, but for our country? And how do we stretch that in terms of our organizations with the strategies and the plans that we have, so that we can make sure that our country can go forward as a people who are looking to be fully reconciled with each other? And then how do we elevate? In other words, how do we find the leadership that we need to take us to where we want to be? That's reconciliation in a nutshell from an Indigenous perspective. RISE. And sadly, we're not seeing a lot of this happening at the moment. But boy, do we need to reflect. We need to innovate. We need to stretch our imaginations. We need to elevate our leadership to the kind of leadership that we desperately require and need at this particular time in our history to ensure that we continue to bring together all of our communities, all of our cultures, all of our differences in diversity, and make sure that we have a different vision for this country that we all call our home. I'll stop there.
Thank you so much, Uncle Ray, for addressing our conference today. You've really raised in very interesting ideas and ways in which to really bring us together and to harness the experience of the past and really what comes from Indigenous culture and its implications on what we can actually put into, you know, this political world, in our neighborhoods, in this into action, really. And so we really appreciate so greatly the time that you've given to give us those insights that from here the conference will build on, and hopefully again in the breakout sessions that everyone will stay on and be part of can draw on those insights and think about those practical steps forward. So I just wanted to also welcome Penny Taylor, who is the race relations researcher at the University of Tasmania. Now, Penny has recently undertaken a PhD exploring Aboriginal perspectives on race relations and on building white Australian capacity for constructive race relations. Penny was head researcher at Larrakia Nation Aboriginal Corporation in Darwin. Her work has included extensive research with Darwin's Aboriginal population, developing radio material and cross-cultural training programs to enhance race relations. Prior to this, Penny worked as a human rights lawyer, both in the community sector and for the United Nations, specialising in women's and children's human rights. Now we have this great opportunity to enjoy a conversation with Uncle Ray and Penny, and which will delve deeper into this session's theme. But just before we start on that, I also wanted to invite and encourage our audience to type in their questions for both Uncle Ray and Penny by clicking on the Q&A button at the bottom of your Zoom window. So we can also go to question and answers to end this session. So I'm here in some way to moderate the session, but this is really Penny and Uncle Ray's time to explore deeply together and unpack some of these ideas around social cohesion and what Indigenous culture can bring to really enhance our understanding, how to bring that diversity together, to work in unity, and to really realise that inherent oneness that we all share. So I'll hand it over to you, Penny. And you know, what I was thinking was maybe you could share some initial thoughts on today's topic by unpacking what social cohesion can mean.
Thanks, Ida, and hi, Uncle Ray. I'm so delighted to be having this conversation with you today. So I think Uncle Ray's made a lot of the key points about social cohesion that I would probably want to make, but I'll just unpack it a little bit in terms of thinking of social cohesion as having layers like an onion. And so in a way, in Australia, we already have social cohesion in a sense, you know, where we're an intensely multicultural society. We have very little violence between different groups. We have strong anti-discrimination laws that, in terms of sexual orientation, in terms of disability, in terms of religion and race, a lot of protections there. And there's this basic understanding that difference should be tolerated, and that I can be me and you can be you, and we can get on with it. But this is actually quite a low level of social cohesion, and there is a more sophisticated level we can consider, and that is where diversity and difference is appreciated and it's delighted in. And we go to multicultural festivals to enjoy that diversity in Australia, and we see it as a positive feature of Australian society. But there is also an even greater level of social cohesion above this again, which is what I feel Uncle Ray was speaking to quite profoundly. And that is where we understand that we are inherently interconnected and interdependent, and that we need each other. and that we are part of one common whole, and all the different groups in society and different parts of society are actually part of society. And when we come together, we make up something that is greater than the sum of its parts. And I think a really good analogy to understand this is the human body itself. And we think of the individuals as the cells in the human body. And, you know, each of these cells has a contribution to make to the well-being and the well-functioning of the body. And each of these cells needs to receive from the body everything it needs to be able to make that contribution and to be a healthy cell. And so when these cells cluster together, they form the kidneys and the eyes and the skin and the heart. And all of these things are essential to the good functioning of the body. And if any of these cells are deprived of what they need to be healthy cells and to make their maximum contribution, then the body is disabled. And the body as a whole is disadvantaged, including all of the cells in that body and the possibility of what they can be. And so it's just crazy to think of organs of the body as being in competition with each other. We don't think that way in terms of the human body. We think of it as a cohesive and organic whole that works together. And I think that Yvonne touched on this in her welcome as well, in that similarly with various groups in society, we all have specific contributions to make, and no one group or culture has all the answers to the problems that the world's facing now, and no one group or culture has a monopoly on ideal human behaviour. And so when we deprive different groups of a voice or of the capacity to contribute, we're all poorer for it. And particularly in this time of COVID and climate change, we're actually placing ourselves in danger. And so I was thinking in terms of today, I was a little bit thinking about the implications of what COVID has shown us as a society, or what opportunities it's created. And while I acknowledge, you know, absolutely that COVID has caused immense suffering, and to not downplay that or dismiss it at all, certainly across the world, and even in Australia as a rich country, there has been death and sickness and loss of livelihood and mental health problems arising from the separation. But acknowledging all of that, I think it can also be viewed as a tremendous opportunity for our society, in that it's shone a very bright light on our interdependence and our interconnectedness, and shown that it is a reality. And until all of us are safe, none of us are really safe from this disease. And until, you know, we address climate change for all of us, none of us will be unaffected or safe from it. And so in a way, it's helped us to reckon with this reality a little bit. And it's also shone a bit of a light on some of our old habits of thought and some of our social systems and structures, such as partisanship and, our valorization of individualism and othering, that, you know, are not conducive to high-level social cohesion, and therefore are not conducive to the best interests of humanity or any of its members. And so I was thinking, you know, today we can explore, you know, with this renewed appreciation of our interdependence and interconnectedness and the importance of high-level social cohesion. What are the implications of this for society? How do we align ourselves better and transform our individual attitudes and behaviours and our social structures to achieve this social cohesion that Uncle Ray's already spoken to so beautifully? And it's really quite a massive conversation, and that's the opportunity we have today, to break it down to a smaller part by focusing perhaps on the Aboriginal, social cohesion in terms of the Aboriginal population and the broader population, because I feel like that the situation of Aboriginal people in Australia today is a litmus test of where we're actually at with social cohesion in this country. A lot of us can feel like everything's going okay because we might be in a very powerful, privileged group, but actually I think the litmus test of how socially cohesive we are is looking at the situation of Aboriginal people, and also to consider, you know, what are the personal and collective changes that we need to achieve that true reconciliation that Uncle Ray, you were speaking about, where it's not just forgive and forget and move on and leave everything as it is. We're actually talking about reconciliation requiring quite a profound transformation of Australia in structures and attitudes and behaviours, and a great imagination, collective imagination of what we can be together. And so I sort of wanted to throw it back to you now, Ray, with that thought.
Thanks, Penny.
Yeah, what kinds of things do you think need to happen in this society And, you know, we often seem to talk in terms of what Aboriginal people need to do or what needs to happen in Aboriginal communities, but what do you think needs to happen in broader society, and what attitudes and behaviours need to change in broader society for Aboriginal people to be able to take their rightful place in Australian society, and also what needs to shift in order for Aboriginal ways of knowing, doing and being to be able to make their full contribution to the health of Australian society and the good functioning of Australian society?
Oh, that's simple.
Big question.
Well, you know, I come from the other side of 1967, and for you know, the newer Australians, you need to understand the history of our country and what happened here. If you want to understand a little bit about Aboriginal people, you have to do a little bit more research on who we are and the different ways and nation groups that are in this country. That's really the starting point. For example, if I went into your country, the very first thing I wanted to know was, well, who lives here? Who are the original inhabitants of this country? Because I want to go and pay my respects to them. I want to make sure that they know who I am and that I'm on their country. That's just for us a simple way of saying, that's why we do acknowledgement of country. I'm here on Gadigal country. This is not my country. This is not my land. This is not my estate. And so I need to make sure that I acknowledge that I'm on their country. I'm in their house. I'm in their home. I'm on their land. And I just want to make sure that once I'm in their land, I will pay the deepest respects and walk in the humility that is expected of me when I'm in someone else's territory. That's important. So I would do that in your country. I would go there and I'd find the traditional owners, whoever they are, and say, listen, I'm in your country here. Can I be welcomed? Because of who I am. That's important to us as Indigenous Australians. There are 4 attitudes that I think that I've come up against that are really challenging, but they need that there are solutions to it. The 4 attitudes are, the first is ignorance. You can overcome ignorance through education. The second attitude that we come up against is apathy. I don't know and I don't care. But if you walk in our shoes, that's how you overcome apathy. The third is arrogance. I don't care. But you can change arrogance through humility, walking humbly. And the fourth is hypocrisy. And to overcome hypocrisy, we need to start telling the truth telling, and being honest about who we are. But those 4 attitudes are very rife in our country, and they're some of the ways, I think, to overcome those kind of attitudes and behaviours. And for us as Indigenous Australians, we've lived with those 4 attitudes for the last 200 and so years, and in all the endeavours that we do, we're trying to change those attitudes and those behaviours so they can reflect a much more cohesive community. And now with the newer Australians, we only got the multicultural policy in 1975, I think it was. But when I was brought up, it was just it was the white Australia policy only. And it was white Australians who were looked after, not Aboriginal Australians. We were locked away on communities, missions and reserves, and not even thought about, not even cared about. We were under terra nullius. We don't live here, no one's land. All of those kinds of policies. I think it's really important to overcome our ignorance through education. And thankfully, we only have our, the Aboriginal education policy only came into being in 1982. So it's only a number of years down the track. It's not even our generation yet. But that policy there can't be manipulated or changed because it was designed by our people for the benefit of all Australians, not for our own self. And if you look at the Reconciliation Council, that came out of a very important Royal Commission into Black Deaths in Custody back in the 1980s. And that was one of the recommendations. I think it was the last recommendation that it came out of. And for me, it's very fascinating to look at the whole notion of reconciliation. It seems like it's those who are wounded the most who put out their hands and say, come on, let's reconcile. It doesn't come from the perpetrator or the powerful. It comes from those who have been hurt the most. Like a battered wife or a battered woman, she'll still try to look for some kind of reconciliatory processes from her abuser. And so here we are, still putting out our hands through the Reconciliation Council. Look it up on the web. They have the 4 things that I talked about and how we can reflect upon it and how we can initiate and innovate the new ways forward for us all if we're willing to go down that track. And I think, you know, as the Baha'i community, look at those kinds of templates that are there for your own benefit and the ways in which you can then look at the ways in which these reconciliatory practices can be implemented in our families and in our communities. The template's there. And if you compare that, you know, our national agenda to South Africa, for example, who've gone through a Truth and Reconciliation Council and have actually did develop a huge, big reconciliation council to look after the processes of reconciliation. I think they only closed their doors a couple of years ago, but their reports are very, very fascinating and powerful as to what kind of things you need to look for in the reconciliation process. And so what I'm saying is, to overcome those incredible barriers in our own minds, is you can't be ignorant about it. Ignorance is not bliss. Ignorance doesn't lead us down the path of reconciliation or togetherness or diversity. And so that's what I would say.
It's really interesting to hear you say that, because, I mean, as Ida mentioned in introducing me earlier, we did a very big multi-year study in Darwin looking at Aboriginal perceptions of white Australian culture, and, you know, because that is the dominant culture in Australia and represents the mainstream to a certain extent, and on race relations. And ignorance came up as a massive thing. You know, it was huge, this theme of ignorance. And again, it was also that combination of people saying that there's ignorance because people just don't know. We've been deprived of a proper education in this country. Their history has been hidden and we aren't taught it properly in our schools. So that's shifting, thank goodness. And it's, you know, we have 1 million Captain Cook statues everywhere, but we don't have so many commemorations of the massacres and other important events that have happened. And so there's this ignorance which can be rectified. But also people pointed to that apathy and that idea that some people just can't be bothered knowing. And I think one respondent said, you know, I'm all right, I'm fine, why should I have to worry about them? Being a common attitude she encountered in terms of Australians. And so, and I think part of what this stems from is which was something else that the respondents commented on, is that in mainstream Australian society, we have a very big valorising of individualism. And that plays out in a lot of ways but one of those ways is, as long as I'm all right, that's all I need to worry about. And it also plays out in a very competitive adversarial approach to things, because right from the beginning in our kindergartens, all through our school system, we're taught that life is a competition and that you need to self-promote and put yourself forward and look after number one and exploit your advantage. And then in the next breath, we're saying that we want equality for everyone. And there's an inherent kind of like disconnect there in these values we're promoting in our society through our education system and through our institutions. You know, our political system is adversarial and competitive. Our legal system is adversarial and competitive. Our economic system is competitive. And it seems to me that alongside just generally addressing the ignorance in the broader Australian population about our history and what's actually happened in this country and where we come from, when we walk backwards into the future and see where we've come from, not only are we looking at what's happened to Aboriginal people, but we need to look at the advantages white people have had, or, you know, the dominant population has had now has as a result of that history, you know, and the attitudes that we have. And I think it's really interesting that you point out how recent it was that we abolished the White Australia policy, because, you know, we kind of think of that as ancient history, but there are people alive for whom that was completely normal mindset and that they voted for it, you know. But the point I wanted to get to was to say, in terms of this individualism that was repeatedly pointed out by a lot of the Aboriginal people in the study, is that it is really, I feel like that's one of the part of the richness, that when we engage in full dialogue with each other and draw on Aboriginal ways of knowing, doing and being, there's an opportunity for Australia to understand other ways of being, and that doesn't have to be how it is.
It is political ideology too that plays, you know, plays a very important part in the competitiveness of it all, because you've got this notion of the resistance to communism, for example, versus what's the other one? Capitalism. And for Indigenous Australians, we watch this political debate going on all the time. You know, the left and the right, the Labor and the Liberals, and all this kind of stuff. There was a writer back in America in the early 1920s. She was a woman. Her name was Mary Parker Follett, or Mary Follett Parker, and she actually declared that to the American political system. She said that the two-party preferred system of government is dead. We need a new form of democracy. And so when you look at the Australian system, could we say that to the Australian system, that the two-party preferred system of governance of our government is dead? It doesn't reflect true democracy. I mean, if a prime minister can go out there and put us in a real difficulty when he goes and buys a sub $50 billion, it leaves our country and our land desolate, our educational systems desolate. It does create huge big challenges for us to rethink what we mean by democracy and the things that are really important to us as a community and as a people and as a nation. If you compare our nation, for example, to Costa Rica, they sold all their military and looked after their country. And now they've got one of the, you know, pristine environments in the world there to look after, how they look after not just only their country, but their people. Because for Indigenous Australians, if you've got a good, clean, healthy land, you've got a good, clean, healthy people. They go both together.
Uncle Ray and Penny, I might just try to bring our audience into this conversation. Now, I feel like the two of you can go on for the rest of the day with this conversation. We would all love to listen and learn from all of you. I think, you know, something that struck me from the comments that you've both shared, and especially with what you started with, Uncle Ray, is the capacity that had already been built for tens of thousands of years by all of the Indigenous nations, you know, on this continent, to respect, to learn about the diversity of each nation, to embrace others. And so this already exists on our land that we all stand on today. And now we have, you know, those who have come from all different lands across the world into this country. And so, you know, maybe taking it down to, you know, our Indigenous population, and what is it that we can learn, and how can we learn to integrate Indigenous practices, philosophies and beliefs meaningfully into our systems and structures in Australia, not in a tokenistic way, but in a way that can elevate those structures. And in that way, as we learn maybe the things that you share about this now, you know, we can learn how to do that with many people bring capacities and insights of how to work together, how to elevate the structures that already exist. Maybe you can share like any examples that you might have that are effective, both Penny and Uncle Ray, that you've seen. And we have a number of questions, so I apologize that we may not get through all of them, but I will share it with Uncle Ray and Penny, that perhaps that they could answer some of them or respond to them at another time. So whoever would like to start first.
Penny, over to you.
Well, I think that partly, I thought this question was directed at Uncle Ray, so I haven't completely turned my mind to it. But I think one of the things that it's interesting to consider is this opportunity we have before us of the voice to Parliament, and how, we've just been talking about partisanship and how divisive that is and how unhelpful it is. And then this voice to Parliament is like this opportunity to have a dialogue at the highest levels of society, where Indigenous voices are fed directly into decision making. And I think the assumption for many is that this voice to Parliament will have a voice to direct matters that relate only to Aboriginal people. But I actually think if we could really embrace it in the great opportunity it presents, is that we can have then that is a direct link for Aboriginal voices to feed into the health of the nation as a whole, and to feed into a new perspective and a broader perspective of what is good for the whole country in many, many respects. And I think so that's one practical measure that is available to us, that all of Australia is being invited to support. All of the Australian community, is up to us as individuals to support that idea.
Yeah.
And then we have this opportunity to have Aboriginal voices directly feeding into the shaping of our nation's policies, and that other worldview, which is, moves away from the individualism and moves towards all of those beautiful things that Yvonne and Ray have been raising.
And also associated with that also is not just the voice, but the truth, the Truth Commission, so that we can understand the truth of this country and the truth of what happened and what is happening, so we can bring that to the fore too. We've got to own our own, take responsibility for our own wrongdoings, or as well as our right doings. But if we don't have a Truth Commission to do that, how on earth, what do you base it on? So that's what I'm saying. We've got to be truth tellers. We've got to tell the truth to each other. We can't avoid the truth. The truth is what will set us free. The truth will also keep us free if we're willing to go down that path. So that's the three things that our people have put in play. Let's have a Truth Commission. Let's also have a treaty. And that treaty is between all of us, just not between black fellows and white fellows. It's between all of us. It's got to reflect that. And sadly, the governments that we've been dealing with are very reluctant to go down that path, and they want to perpetuate the lie that this is their country. It's not their country. This is our country.
And if I could just add something to that, is that all right?
Sure.
I was also just thinking in terms of, really the way we better integrate all these different perspectives is by maximising our spaces for dialogue, and for a healthy dialogue that's not based on a debate or an adversarial system. And, this is one of those spaces, and the voice of Parliament hopefully would be another one of those spaces. And truth-telling is another one of those spaces. That's a form of dialogue too. It's a discussion of the truth of this country. But I think in terms of, we can talk about these big picture things and they feel quite out of reach, but we all have that opportunity to have those dialogues and to engage in those dialogues wherever we can, to enrich our understanding of things and to consider new ways, even within our neighbourhoods and our families and our schools, and to talk to all the different voices, and not just have whoever can shout the loudest or whoever can work the system the best gets to direct how things go. And I just wanted to just give a little quick example of things that we can do, because I think one of the people who's actually here today, I remember a few years ago, she was a manager in an organisation, and it came time for the enterprise bargaining agreement to be revisited. And she was saying, and she was in management, and she was saying, why are we even using this language, which assumes that the workers have different interests from management, and that they have to somehow reach a compromise and go into this bargaining process, rather than we're all part of this organisation. Let's hear everyone's voices about what we want this organisation to be and how we achieve that, and ensure everyone in the organisation is looked after as well as the organisation. And I think that's just a day-to-day example of where you can go into your workspace and change the language to ensure that voices are heard, and we don't take that adversarial, individualistic, partisan kind of approach to things. And we have these opportunities in all parts of our lives. That's what I just wanted to say.
Yeah, I mean, just looking at the title of today's program, National Social Cohesion and Inclusion Conference, that is deeply political, deeply political. And it's really pointing the arrows at some of the very deep issues that are in this country. How do you talk about that in a way in which it's going to give some kind of vision for a better future? That's what we're looking for. I think the whole country is looking for leadership with a better vision. That would be, I think, one of the key issues for the future and perhaps even for the next election. We need a very, very different vision for the future, not one that is antagonistic to countries around us and who are our neighbours, or have different ideologies, political ideology, and based on political ideologies. We live in such a conflict-tensioned world, and we as Aboriginal Australians, we didn't bring this to the table. It came through invasion, and it's still here.
And if that vision's imagined by just one group in society, because let's face it, our parliament is 96% Anglo-Saxon origin, I think. Our judiciary is similar, our media is similar. Like, if this vision is imagined by only one part of society, we miss out on so much possibility and so much rich creativity and ways of being that can make us, could really take us to an amazing future. But we seem to, have the reins of power, and the public discourse seems to be dominated in Australia by one group, and that's something that needs to shift somehow so that we can really hear everyone's voices, not to be nice and not just for fairness, but because it creates so much possibility for all of us.
Penny and Uncle Ray, I painfully have to call our session to a close, but I think we've left on a really important note that everybody here today can be really thinking deeply about what is this vision that we're trying to foster. What is the vision that we all have here that can be spoken about, can be consulted about, that we all can bring to the table to create this collective vision of the future that we want for our country, that is more inclusive, that is more united, that draws on the abilities, talents, capacities, and experience of people from all nations, and especially our Indigenous peoples that we have much to learn from. Our panelists will be joining us soon, but I wanted to thank you both for this truly uplifting session. And I know myself, I've taken a lot away from this, and I hope everyone else has too, that will influence our steps forward in our own spheres of influence, whether they be our neighbourhoods, organisations, whether we be policy makers or work in the halls of government. So I really appreciate your time that you've given to prepare and also to come here today and to share your thoughts and insights. I'll hand it over back to our MC, Saba, and thank you once again.
Thanks, Ida, and on behalf of all the conference participants, I want to thank Ray and Penny for generously giving their time and your thoughts and experiences to really enrich this conversation, and of course to Ida for your facilitation as well. I think there's a lot obviously to take and digest from that. There's really profound thoughts. So we'll have a brief interlude now to reflect on that, and also before we start the next session. While that interlude is taking place, we'll be showing a short animation drawing on some of the insights that were distilled from that Creating an Inclusive Narrative publication I mentioned at the beginning of the conference. And you might also like to take this chance to get a cup of tea, have a stretch, have a biscuit, whatever you might do in the brief interlude, and we'll show the video, and then we'll proceed shortly after. Thanks.